All right, guys, super quick. Gonna get into the video, but first, if y'all want to hear more from Scott, I'm gonna tell you right now. Both his podcast links are down in the description below. Make sure you go down there, give them a listen, give them a download, subscribe to them because I'm being 100% genuine. They are the two highest recommended podcasts I could ever recommend to someone. If you're going to want to become a better Dynasty fantasy football player, highly recommend Dynasty and Chill, the best podcast there is. And I'm going to put the iTunes link down there. But if you don't have iTunes, you can just look up Dynasty and Chill on pretty much anywhere, Podbean, Google Play, and you're going to be able to find it. Make sure if you like this video, if you like what Scott has to say, go down. He plays in like 60 Dynasty leagues, super high volume player, high stakes player, really knows what he's doing. Make sure you go down, subscribe to his channel. You won't regret it. Let's get into the video.
All right, it is Saturday afternoon. I'm here with Mason. We're going to do a live flock chat today. Hopefully we get some patrons and we get some people from other chats coming in here to ask questions. But Mason wanted to start. It was my idea to put this together and wanted to just talk to you a little bit about your strategy with point per carry, super flex, tight end premium rookie drafts where you're not going to be able to just go with the stock ADP because there's going to be increased value for either quarterbacks that run or especially running backs that can get more points with getting carries. So we did a mock draft yesterday. We did this format. A couple other podcasters and I did a mock draft. It was a 12-team league. We did 3 rounds. It was very interesting. Some of the players that came off the board late, and then some of the players that didn't come off the board at all. And I have a theme that I'll talk a little bit about. But I want to just get your strategy in this because I know you're in a lot of leagues where there's a point per carry component. What changes for you in terms of the running backs? I mean, we've talked before about not wanting to reach on running backs that aren't going to have the draft capital. Do you see yourself maybe taking that approach in these types of leagues, knowing that there's going to be a ton of receiver value that you can maybe get a little later?
Well, basically, it comes down to 2 things for me, like 2 different strategies that you have to have for these types of leagues. First one is I made a video yesterday or the day before, I don't know, but it was talking about the importance of knowing your tier breaks and knowing what rookie picks you want to slide into. And I think if you're in a unique league like this, where I don't know about you, Scott, but I'm in, I think, 2 or 3 points per carry leagues. And it seems like every single person in that league has a different set of values. Nobody really is consensus with where they value the players across positions. So I think you kind of got to throw those tiers out the window of how you expect the draft to go. And I kind of just want as many picks as possible. I don't necessarily, I'm not trying to slide into specific pick ranges because I don't know really who's going to be available there as in compared to a regular PPR Superflex draft. Like if you're sitting at the 110, you're feeling real pretty in a regular Superflex PPR draft, thinking that you're going to get whoever falls between Justin Herbert, one of the top rookie wide receivers, or one of the back end tier 1 running backs. But if you're sitting at the 111, you don't know what you're doing. You're thinking maybe I take Jordan Love, maybe I take the top wide receiver of tier 2. But in a points per carry league, really you have no idea what's going to be available there. I would be a lot more willing to be sitting at the right outside of tier breaks just because I don't know if they're necessarily going to fall the way I expect them to. And at the same time, obviously, you have to give an even a bigger premium to those top early round rookie picks that you know you're going to be able to get the elite 3-down running backs.
I think you make a great point that I was just mentioning to this on the Discord chat. Someone had DM'd me a couple questions, and I had kind of said in this format, either it's tight end premium or point per carry or just something that gives different bonuses for different positions. You actually can expect there to be maybe a 2 or 3 pick like leakage in these drafts to where there might be a couple mistakes that happen in front of you. So if your tier ends at the 202 or the 203, you may be able to comfortably sit at the 205 and know, there may be somebody that reaches on a player or doesn't take a pick in the same tiers as you do. They may take a receiver a lot higher than you would have in point per carry. Like yesterday, this mock draft, people started taking the secondary running backs way earlier than I would have taken them. The Keyshawn Vaughn, Zach Moss, A.J. Dillon, those guys were coming off at the end of the first, early second round because of the format. And curiously, those weren't even the running backs that I valued in my next tier. I was looking more at, I wanted Eno Benjamin, I wanted Antonio Gibson, I wanted Darrington Evans. I was fine with saying, I'll wait in the range where I would typically take a receiver. I'm considering those guys there, but even in this class, who is the running back 6 through 11 or 6 through 12 could be totally different. And we're having this discussion before we have the draft capital. So, that obviously could change. I'm going to probably have to move guys I like if they go round 6 in the NFL draft and other guys go round 3 or round 4. But just even in this case, I'm sitting here going, well, I want to take this guy at the 203. I didn't even need to because other people had different running backs in those slots, let alone wide receivers. So I think that's a good point. And where the format is expanded, there's a bigger player pool, which means players' tiers are going to be even more widened from the other people in your league. Do you find yourself ever going back and looking, okay, I know this guy hoards running backs, or I know this team is completely built on running backs, especially if they're a league where it's like a start one in each position? It's very easy to basically just build all running backs. You don't even need to have more than a couple playable receivers. Do you ever look back at people, how they drafted like in years past, and try to scout what they're going to do if they're picking ahead of you?
Well, it might be different for you because I think you have to kind of go out of your way to scout those people because you're in 50 plus leagues, but I'm only in, I think right now 10. So I kind of have a general idea of how the people build without looking at it. But I do think it's a great point, just knowing how the players are going to go, especially if they're picking in front of you, and whether or not you to try to decide, do I think I'm going to be able to get a running back here? Do I think I'm going to be able to get Cam Akers behind CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy in a points per carry league based on the couple guys in front of you? And this is the perfect situation to talk about it in, because I find, at least in points per carry leagues and also in superflex leagues, everyone values the position differently. And you really have to know from an owner to owner perspective.
So in this type of format, where would you take someone like Jalen Hurts given the point per carry? I mean, are you, regardless of his draft capital, would you take him ahead of all of the secondary running backs, even if they go in the mid-third round, like an A.J. Dillon goes in the mid-third, Jalen Hurts goes middle of the second? Are you prioritizing the quarterback, or are you waiting? Because personally, I think you're going to be able to get like Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm types in the middle of the third round in this type of format, because it just pushes so many players ahead of them.
I am going to reach on Jalen Hurts, and that's mainly just because I see the upside with A.J. Dillon as like just him specifically, but all these tier 2 running backs, I don't really see them having league-winning, matchup-winning upsides. I think they can be great plays in your flex spots, especially in a points per carry league. But at the same time, in a super flex league, points per carry league, if Jalen Hurts is taking snaps, if he's going to be the starting quarterback, you can confidently plug him in and expect in my opinion, in a points per carry league, I think you can easily expect a low-end QB1 finish week to week with Jalen Hurts. So I'm willing to reach on him just a little bit, just because it's really simple. If you're going to start him or not. If he's starting for an NFL team, he's sliding into your lineup. You don't really have to make that decision.
So what if he goes in the back half of the second and Jacob Eason goes in the early part of the second? Would you still take him over Jacob Eason?
Oh, easily. It doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter about historical hit rates at that point. If they're that close, I know it's a lot better to be an early second round pick compared to a late second round pick when it comes to the quarterback position. But at the same time, Jacob Eason, say he does hit his 80th percentile outcome, he's going to be a high end quarterback 2 for you. Jalen Hurts 80th percentile outcome, he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback, at least in a points per carry league.
What would be your threshold of, if Jacob Eason, well, forget Jacob Eason for a second, Jalen Hurts versus Jordan Love? What's your threshold there? Where would you consider taking?
I think that's where it gets interesting, because at least where I see, like these mock drafts I'm looking at, Jordan Love's being drafted in the back end of round 1, maybe sometimes sliding into the earlier part of round 1. And I think if Hurts lasts till the back end of round 2 and Love goes top 20 NFL draft, you have to take Love over Hurts just because of the projected job security.
Yeah, see, that's what I've been wrestling with, because it seems like Jordan Love's value is starting to go down a little bit because of the Jalen Hurts hype. He seems to be rising at least to an equivalent point, and then in this format, yesterday's mock, he actually went lower than Jordan Love, but I can see it being preference-based when you actually get into a rookie draft. Are you worried at all with last year, the year before, we took advantage of the fact that Daniel Jones, Josh Allen, Drew Lock, those guys were good values in rookie drafts, and they happened to get opportunities to start, if not right away, within the first half of their rookie season. Are you worried that the current quarterback landscape is going to prevent any of these secondary guys outside of Burrow and Tua, maybe Justin Herbert if he lands in, Miami or the Chargers. Are you worried that any of these other rookies are just not going to have? They're going to be behind a legitimate starter that they're just not going to even get on the field in the first year?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, especially with Dalton, Cam Newton, and Winston all sitting out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this is like the most talented. I mean, not necessarily talented towards the top, but the deepest the quarterback position has been in the while across the NFL. And there are a lot of guys who are just 1 year away from being out of the NFL. I know we've been saying that for a long time now, but I think that you make a great point that these rookie quarterbacks are probably going to have to sit behind someone just for a little bit.
So does that sway you away from taking like a Jordan Love if he lands with the Colts or something, knowing, hey, their plan, unless there's an injury, their plan is probably not to have him take a single snap in 2020? Would you take the approach of I can legitimately probably buy that guy later, or do you think there's going to be a Mahomes level overcorrection to where people see what happened with Mahomes, they see what happens with the guy that sits the entire year? His value doesn't necessarily tank. The hype actually builds as you get later on into the season. Do you think there's going to be an opportunity to buy the guys lower, or do you think dynasty owners are getting too smart?
You answered it right before I could. I was going to say that people are just going to make the Mahomes comparison, especially I know you're not asking directly for Jordan Love, but when they're already making that, like, all like the draft mock started saying he has a Mahomes level upside. Yeah. I think that just for really any of these quarterbacks, it's going to work that way. Just, I don't think their value is going to lower, because if you remember, even back when Mahomes was a rookie quarterback, I don't remember his value falling much at all from sitting behind Alex Smith for a year. I could be misremembering that. And obviously it worked out where he was a massive smash. But even from looking back at then, he was a late round 1 Superflex rookie pick. And I'm pretty sure, please correct me if I'm wrong in this. This was back in 2017. I don't even remember the Kaiser year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was it was 2017, and he was, if you remember, that was a draft where I remember doing some startups that year, and I hate to admit it, but there were a couple startups that year where I took DeShone Kizer and I took Mitchell Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes. And looking back, you're like, that's a big mistake. But if you remember, there was Trubisky that went 2 overall, and then you also had Mahomes and Deshaun Watson that went in the first round. And then you had DeShone Kizer that went, I believe, the 51st pick to the Browns.
Yeah, early.
But they were all kind of intertwined in terms of where their value was. But later on in the offseason, their value started to be a little bit more transparent, to where Kizer, if you remember, Kizer really blew up in the preseason.
Yeah, I was excited.
Yeah, well, he was announced as the starter, and it was the same with it was the same as Trubisky. You thought they only had Mike Glennon that was in his way. So, like, you had a path for him to get on the field right away. So it basically became like Watson, Kizer, Trubisky, and Mahomes fell for the people that didn't necessarily love him. He fell because it was clear he was not going to play year 1. So his value actually started to tank a little bit towards the end of the year as Kizer moved up. And I remember a startup where I literally took Kizer and Trubisky over Mahomes, and I'm not in the league anymore. But that clearly, if you just look at that, I mean, within a year, you're looking at that pick and saying, wow, that was a massive mistake. And I think that kind of showed you what can happen if you rush a guy on the field. I still believe DeShone Kizer could have been a decent quarterback, and he just literally got ruined by that first year, being forced into the lineup. So in a way, you kind of hope that these guys who are drafted in spots, like Jacob Eason, I've seen him mocked to Tampa Bay in the second round, which would be, they're not going to take a quarterback in the first round, because that would be a signal to Brady that, like, they're bringing in legitimate competition. But if you took somebody in the second, I think it kind of tells that rookie that, hey, you're going to sit for a year, you're behind Brady, so there's no expectations. So I think that type of player would be of value, especially if it is somebody like Eason, because people don't necessarily love him already.
Yeah.
And if you put him in that spot, I think you'll be able to get a good value on him either in drafts, so you don't have to worry about his price going down. But I think it's an interesting debate, because right now we've never seen a quarterback landscape that has been, this packed. There's good quarterbacks that don't even have jobs, and now you're bringing in potentially 6 or 7 rookies. I wanted to bring this up because I haven't talked about this on a podcast yet, but I was listening to Matt Waldman's podcast the other day, and I don't know if you've ever listened to Matt Waldman's show or read any of his materials. He can be a little out there in terms of his fantasy content. He's a hugely into film and basically is completely out of touch in terms of where players value in fantasy.
Okay.
And he did a breakdown on Jake Fromm, and it wasn't all his breakdown. It was actually from, I believe, JT O'Sullivan, who was a former quarterback in the NFL, did a really in-depth film breakdown on Jake Fromm. And basically their conclusions were the Georgia offense they were running play calls that completely don't fit the type of dropbacks that they were asking him to do. So basically, like plays where the ball should have been out after like 3 steps, they're having him drop back like 5 or 7 steps. And it's constantly putting him in position to make late throws, throw behind receivers. And he said, this is where the narrative that Jake Fromm has a weak arm is coming from. He basically said Jake Fromm does not have a weak arm. It's not a great arm, but it's an average arm. I mean, like he and Joe Burrow have comparable arms.
Yeah.
No one's really questioning Joe Burrow's arm strength in terms of can he play in the NFL. And he was one of the first people that's actually taken up for Jake Fromm, basically saying, this guy's gotten a completely raw deal in college. And curiously, they fired that entire offensive staff at Georgia. They've completely overhauled the offense that they're going to run. And then it really just set him up to fail in his college career. So he said he was actually higher than Jake Fromm. He had Jake Fromm as his 4th quarterback, which is kind of interesting to me because everyone seems to have him, comfortably at, the last spot, like the 7th quarterback off the board. So we'll see what the NFL does, but that's a player that I'm warming up a little bit on buying if everyone else is off of him. Because, I mean, you could maybe get him 4th round of some super flex drives.
Yeah, I was going to say you can get him for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously if he goes like in the 4th round of the NFL draft, I'm not going to be interested. But I do think that like running backs, I think the quarterback, a crowded quarterback in the NFL right now is going to push some of these like secondary quarterbacks down a little bit. So this was my next question for you was, okay, we're going to see maybe no running backs go in the 1st round this year. You agree?
I don't know. If you look at offshore betting sites, I think they're having Swift at like over under 28.5.
Okay.
Or something. At least I looked like a month ago. Yeah.
Okay. So you say it's possible that none go in the 1st round.
Yes, it's definitely possible.
And even if they do, you might have one that creeps in like the last 5 or 6 picks of the 1st.
Yeah, I think that's the safe projection right now.
So do you think that, because if you looked at like 5 years ago, Ezekiel Elliott's going in the top 5. And 4 years ago, you have Christian McCaffrey going in the top 5. You have Leonard Fournette going in the top 5. Like, do you see the running backs today that are going like late 1st, early 2nd, almost being the equivalent of what used to be like a top 10, top 15 pick? The adjustment is just the NFL teams are devaluing the position, so all of them move back a little bit. Do you see the same thing with quarterbacks?
I don't know if I can say it with quarterbacks just because of the rookie contracts and how it's laid out. I think that it's kind of the similar comparing to an early round 1 pick and a late round 1 pick, but I don't think they want their franchise quarterback getting outside of round 1 if they can help it, just so they can get that 5th year option.
Okay. So outside of the top couple, I mean, clearly every year the elite quarterbacks that are slam dunk starters from day 1 are going to go high, but the secondary guys, if you don't necessarily see Jalen Hurts as a franchise quarterback, do you still, if you're a team, do you still prioritize having to move up to get him? Or do you think teams are kind of saying, well, there's decent options out there available now in free agency. I can always go out and get an Andy Dalton if I wanted. I can always trade for, even someone like Case Keenum or someone that I know has NFL experience. They're not hard to get anymore. So I'm not going to rush to move up to get, like in past years, people moved up to get, like Lamar Jackson. The Ravens move up in the 1st round to get him. Now, do you see it more of just a luxury to where, I guess my point is, do you see these secondary quarterbacks, because teams know there's quarterbacks available, do you see them falling into like maybe is a late day 2 pick today for a quarterback the same as what an early day 2 pick would have been a couple years ago?
Scott, I don't think I'm smart enough to answer that question. I can't really say, but I do know if I was an NFL franchise and Andy Dalton is sitting out there just free for the taking pretty much, I mean, I'm not really incentivized to go out there and draft a guy I see with upside, and I don't know he's the real answer in early round 2.
So you're not going to spend a round 2 pick on like Jake Fromm when you see him.
No, definitely not.
His ceiling is maybe like his ceiling might be like a Kirk Cousins, but he's probably more like an Andy Dalton type anyway.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, that's just something that's curious to me because I'm trying to figure out, we're going to see some running backs and quarterbacks go later in drafts this year, and it's going to throw dynasty players for a loop. I mean, I would not be shocked if there's some running backs that we really like. We've talked about it in a couple of videos with Cam Akers. I wouldn't be shocked if like Cam Akers goes in the early fourth or late third, or he could go in the early second. Who really knows?
Yeah.
But if he falls, I mean, how do we decipher that? I mean, that's something that's been bothering me is people talk about the draft capital, and I think it matters most for tight ends and running backs, but it also matters for quarterbacks too. I mean, how do we really adjust to what the NFL is doing? I mean, do you have any processes that you have in place? Like, are you just going to strictly go on draft capital like you would have a couple years ago?
I'm pretty much before the NFL draft. I'm just trying to like get a prototype of how these players play, if they can be a 3-down running back, if they're going to be a situational running back, and then adjust with the draft capital from there in the situation. So I'm still mainly thinking draft capital. Like with Cam Akers, I pretty much see him as if he gets the capital, he can be a 3-down running back. But if he doesn't, he's just an Alexander Madison.
Gotcha. You made any recent trades that have stuck out to you in any of your leagues?
Oh, let's talk about. I've had one thing in both startup drafts I've recently joined. I've been. I took DK Metcalf at the end of the beginning of the fifth, end of the fourth, so somewhere around there, and then I waited about a round and saw that Calvin Ridley was still on the board. In both leagues, I pretty much because in both leagues when I was on the clock, it came down to me: do I want DK Metcalf or do I want Calvin Ridley? And it was a close decision. But I took DK Metcalf, and in both leagues, I got messages saying, oh, I wanted Metcalf, blah, blah, blah. So I waited around and then traded back to pick up additional value and get Calvin Ridley. Well, what do you think about that comparison? Because I think that's so interesting right now. And I think Calvin Ridley's a guy that I've sent more trade offers out for this offseason than pretty much anyone else.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would have think it might be the other way. There's a lot of buzz for DK Metcalf, but I've seen that there's a decent amount of buzz for Calvin Ridley too. I mean,
that's what I made a video but was talking about it like a month, maybe 5 weeks ago, like 2 or 3 weeks before free agency, because I pretty much assumed Mohamed Sanu gone, Austin Hooper gone is going to open up a lot of targets for Calvin Ridley, and I'm not even really projecting Julio Jones, his volume to go down whatsoever. I just think Calvin Ridley can take the step 3, and I was confident in saying it, but I hadn't necessarily heard anyone else saying it. But then I read an Evan Silva article about a week later. Obviously, Evan Silva has never heard my name or ever watched one of these YouTube videos, but it was just really reassuring that he ended up ranking, and this is pre-Austin Hooper leaving Atlanta, he had Calvin Ridley as his wide receiver 8 for 2020.
Man, that's pretty. I think that's probably pricing him at his ceiling, but some of his values milked into there. If something did happen to Julio, he's got a natural floor already, but potentially could have a massive upside if something happened to Julio. So I kind of get that. I think for Dynasty, I made a couple bad trades last year involving DK Metcalf. I actually traded a 2021 first, what ended up being the 103, and DK Metcalf for Tyreek Hill. And at the time, it was after Tyreek Hill came back. It was during the season. So I was thinking, okay, Tyreek Hill basically is a guy that can win this league for me. I ended up not winning the league, but now that I look back at it, I don't want to say desperately, but I would love to cash back out for Tyreek Hill. Give me Calvin Ridley, give me DK Metcalf, give me any receiver that I see as like a stable wide receiver 2 for, Tyreek Hill. And then you also throw in if you can get a top 5 pick, I mean, that to me, that's a perfect type of pivot down that you can make. I asked you before we started recording this about Michael Thomas. I'm actually going to try to move all my Michael Thomas shares, not because I don't think he's valuable, not because I don't think he's the number 1 receiver in Dynasty, but it's just the volatility at the position. If I can get anybody that I think can move into a top 5 or 6 receiver for Michael Thomas and give me a significant piece on top, I'm literally just I'm just gaining assets. I'm just accumulating value there, especially if I have a contending team. How much do I really lose if Michael Thomas is only 90% of what he was last year, but one of these other guys is pretty good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts. I made a couple deals recently. I traded Stefon Diggs. I know we talked about Stefon Diggs before. And this is a league where you start 15 players. I traded Stefon Diggs for Devontae Parker and Blake Jarwin, and it's a 1.75 PPR league. So what do you think about that?
I like it just because you're going to be able to slide Jarwin. I actually heard a lot of Jarwin hype last week, and I'm kind of buying into it just because in that league specifically, I'd imagine Jarwin's going to be an every week starter for you in one of those flex spots. So I like it, but I do want to talk about Stefon Diggs for a little bit just because you bring him up.
Yeah.
And I know that everyone is low on him with the trade to Buffalo. And this is a completely different side note. And I actually didn't think about this until Evan Silva started talking about it. But with all the cancellations and the pushbacks of all these offseason programs for the NFL teams, I think this year more than ever is the year that you want to avoid players switching teams in situations like that. But other than that one fact, I actually just say this was in a vacuum. So it's not really relevant, but I just want to make the point. I think Josh Allen's better for Stefon Diggs than Kirk Cousins is.
Let's hear why.
I did the so whenever I was evaluating all these wide receiver switching teams, the main thing I did is I looked at the quarterback, basically not his career numbers, but year to year, and try to look at the situation he had in his air yards per pass attempt or attempted air yards per pass attempt to just try to get a gauge of where he's throwing the ball, and then looked at where the wide receiver is operating on the field. And basically it came down to Kirk Cousins was a very passive quarterback and had an extremely low air yards per pass attempt, at least. And then Josh Allen has been airing it out since he entered the NFL, similar to a Jameis Winston. So I kind of see Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen being a kind of a perfect fit, and I think that's why Buffalo gave up so much to go get him.
Do you value Stefon Diggs more in a league where you have a little bit more forgiveness in terms of your starting lineups? Where like I would hate to build a team around. I mean, not that I don't want these guys, but if you start saying you have to pick two guys every week between like DK Metcalf and Stefon Diggs and DJ Chark and Michael Gallup, that looks great on paper. You have four pretty solid wide receiver twos there, but then you have to determine which of the two are going to get big target shares on a week-to-week basis. DK Metcalf and Stefon Diggs, if they hit their value, they're probably going to have to do it on 100 targets, maybe 110 targets. So, do you want to have to pick between 4 or 5 of those guys if you only can pick 2 or 3? Whereas I love getting those guys in these deep leagues where you have 6 or 7 guys you can start. You just put them all in there and you hope you get a spike week out of 1 or 2. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. I mean, pretty much every league I play in is start 11, start 12, and at most you're having to start 2 running backs, So I'm throwing in, at least not in my points per carry leagues, but in all my regular PPR leagues, I'm throwing out 6 wide receivers every week.
All right. Well, Shane came on and kicked him out because it looks like he died again on his connection died again. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, really appreciate you setting this up, man.
Yeah, man. You guys will see this on the channel at some point. Mason will do his magic to get it up and catch you guys later. Thanks.